it would be good just to reinforce a couple of things. One of the lessons we've learned in putting together this agenda is, my God, we should have put you guys in small groups much earlier than we did. So, you know, I think it was really interesting to observe the energy and the passion and at times the emotion in some of those groups just before lunch. So I wanted to say that that's really great. That's one of the things that we wanted to come from this partnership meeting. It was one of the things that the three-day agenda was designed to enable and to drive forward. So, you know, we welcome the sort of healthy debate that I think there's been across the rooms, and quite a lot of pushback. I think that's good. You know, the papers that we'd sent out as part of the background to this paper may be too much information, but they were not a manifesto. They're not a new set of policy statements. They were there, designed to provoke and prompt discussion. And I want you to sort of reflect on that and be conscious that this is the type of healthy debate and healthy discussion that we wanted to have. I think the second thing I wanted just to reinforce is we're trying to work through the way in which we're constructing the agenda. I think we probably need to tweak it to make it a little bit more consistent with what your needs and your behaviors are. So, you know, we're going to try and see how we can have a little bit more discussion from the group and a little less talking heads at the front. So that's something that I've been picking up, and I wanted to give you that feedback on how we can sort of optimize where we're going. I think the third thing I wanted to say is that we're looking for ways to build momentum. You know, the purpose of this first partnership meeting is to try to identify where we can find common ground and to focus on those actions that will help enhance that common ground across the partnership. And let's remember, doing stuff in a partnership is way more complicated than just doing stuff unilaterally. So some of the discussion and some of the emotion and some of the passion, I think, is all part and parcel of doing things in a different way, in a consultative way, as a partnership. People are running at different speeds, people have different agendas. But we seek to find the common ground, and the common ground is something that we can all rally behind as a way to support the outcomes that we want in the sector. It's no easy task, and I think that's something that we're picking up from this first full day in the partnership meeting. So, you know, we welcome your critical reflection. You know, we really need to hold a mirror to ourselves as a partnership and find out what we're doing right and what we're doing wrong. And I'd like to see that that's the spirit of this meeting, that we reflect critically, but that we seek to find ways in which we can support the partnership to move forward along a common path with a common roadmap.
Let's move then, and we'll run through the debriefs of the 3 sessions in a row, and then hopefully ask for questions of clarification, but then save the plenary discussion after the third debrief so that we have a more holistic picture in terms of what we're seeing with the coherence of this framework. If I can start in order, the order that appears in the program, that would be the sustaining the political dialogue and future high-level meetings breakout session. If that Representative Sanjay, I don't know if it will be you or if there's someone else, please. Followed by strengthening country-led processes, and then finally monitoring and SWA.
So our group was a great group. I think who was part of the sustaining political? Can you put your hands up so you're collectively liable for what I say next? Okay, so it was a really high quality group, and it was very constructive dialogue. What we started with was a reflection back in trying to answer the question of what do you think the most successful achievement, political achievement of SWA has been. So we did that very quickly, individually, and then put it all together. And the outcome was, first of all, the high-level meeting with very different reasons for why, but the high-level meeting was clearly upfront in terms of one of the key achievements. The second was the follow-through from the high-level meeting to things that have happened in countries. So clearly in some countries, the fact that their ministers have gone to a high-level meeting, made commitments, has been followed through in terms of more pressure and accountability. And then there was a third element, which was around slightly more generic stuff as well as specific results as a consequence of the high-level meeting. So either donors making more resources available, or specific donors making more resources available, or greater dialogue between WASH and other sectors like education and health, or better dialogue. So there were three kind of areas where it was recognized that SWA has made big political contribution. And that's also interesting in terms of looking forward as well. So looking forward, we basically structured the discussion around two questions. One of them was a little bit of lifting our heads above the parapet and doing a bit of visioning. What is the vision for SWA? And then the second is the how. How does, how would we achieve that vision, and how do we deploy the different instruments, like the high-level meeting, like the secretariat, like members, and partners to do that. In terms of the vision, there was a lot of stuff coming out, and I'm not going to go through it all, but you know, it varied from the post-2015 to make sure that water, and within that WASH, is well reflected in the post-2015, down to things at country level, that WASH is institutionalized in decision making. So there was a lot of material from which to draw a vision, but obviously there would be more work to be done to pull that together into a collective vision. There were a number of issues that came up, and I think we'll divide it into three broad issues. One is that there are certain preconditions so to get us all onto the same page, and we need common understanding on a number of issues, one of which is the role of partners versus the role of secretariat. And this is interesting because for me, having been engaged with SWA for a number of years from different perspectives, these are actually the very same questions that came up right at the start. And I think what it shows is an evolution that a partnership with 87 partners has to go through, as compared to a partnership with 20 members just a couple of years ago or so. So one is role of partners versus role of secretariat and so on. Second is around the value added of SWA, understanding what the value added of SWA is as opposed to all the partners doing things individually. And then thirdly, it's around the language for expressing our vision and political targets. So we need to come up with a vision and political targets, but then use the same language to advocate or to push that. And that's the analogy that was used by Darren in his summing up of the session was the International Year of Sanitation, and how everybody could get behind 4 or 5 key messages which then have a huge impact. So number one is a few kind of basics. Number two is a note of caution on the high-level meeting. And this is balancing the tension between, you know, it was a great success, and I'm not, you know, perhaps never before had so many important people gathered to discuss WASH exclusively at a global level. So it is a winning formula, but there is the issue of diminishing returns, that if you do that again, would it really have the same impact? So that's the tension on the high-level meeting that we captured. The third element are some specific actions. Specific actions, as I mentioned, around the vision, pulling it together. There are some great ideas, but they need to be pulled together a bit. specific actions around leveraging the political capital and impact of the high-level meeting to national level. So there are some examples of where that has happened, but it needs to happen across the board. And also, I think needless to say, very important is the monitoring of the high-level commitments, or the tracking of the commitments that have been made at the high-level meeting, to see how those are progressing. And that's something that we struggled with after the first high-level meeting, so it's really important to get that right after the second one. The third element is having a small number of strategic relationships to make sure that we get our message across. So targeting of finance ministers is one thing, but also there might be, and there were a lot of discussion around who other stakeholders might be, parliamentarians, future finance ministers, so constituencies from which finance ministers come, or constituencies from which other decision makers come. So there must be, there has to be a little bit of a strategic targeting of key constituencies who are going to be making decisions tomorrow. And then the chair. I think one message also was that the chair and the former president could be used very effectively in deploying some of these messages, including in, for example, writing after the, following up on the high-level meeting, writing to heads of state and saying, congratulations on your commitments, and we look forward to knowing what has happened. So there's a lot of really good stuff coming out of this. There are lots of real gems. They do need to be pulled together. They can't be, we can't nail all this down in a couple of hours. But yeah, I think there's a lot of material from which to get good feedback to kind of take this partnership to the next level.
Let's move then to the next debrief, which is on strengthening country-led processes.
So this was about the country processes, by which we mean the planning, the monitoring, the leadership, the financing at country level. And what is it that SWA can do, should be doing, and shouldn't be doing at that level? A key thing, just as in the previous, as in the high-level meeting group, a key thing to come up was, what is the role of the partners in their everyday work versus the role of the secretariat, or even the steering committees, the steering committee and its working groups. And the distinction was this. When we asked all of the countries, did they need help with their country processes, we got a lot of ideas, or a lot of requests just in this room in that meeting. They included more support for M&E, more support for donor coordination, more support for both finance and financing strategies. So everybody needs help on these country processes, and all of us work on these country processes. So the distinction that we came to was that all SWA partners are helping countries develop these processes, these country processes, but that is not necessarily the role of the Secretariat or the steering committee or the working groups. Right? So there was a distinction between those two. So everyone should be involved in the country processes, of course, but what the steering committee, what the Secretariat is doing might be much, much more limited. We also had a discussion about how country processes should be tackled, whether they should be tackled through a technocratic process of fixing the policy, the institutions, or from a bottom-up process, which would involve lobbying at the local government level and encouraging local governments to make sure that everyone in their constituencies are served. And indeed, in many countries, in most countries, we should be doing both a bottom-up and a top-down process, because both are required. But in a very, very small subset of Clarissa's crockery, right? And I challenge you to say that very quickly. Everyone, try and say that. 3 times in a row. Clarissa's crockery. I didn't hear anybody say that. What we talked about is that possibly it's even a cappuccino cup on top of the small saucer that we should be dealing with through the Secretariat, through the steering committee, and through the working groups, and not even as big a piece of crockery as this. An espresso cup, sorry, an espresso cup. And Tariq latched onto this idea of MPRI very clearly and said, you mean an intensive care unit, right? So I thought, for everyone who hasn't been involved in endless calls about what MPRI is, just think of, is there a function for SWA, the Secretariat and the working groups, to deal with this intensive care unit? Countries which are really off track and just don't know where to start. Have we got a role to bring them into the intensive care unit? And we had the example of George Yango, who was chairing, as we did in Liberia. And there wasn't consensus on that, actually. So we had a vote about it, and we had a discussion about these things, but there wasn't really consensus on whether this was a great idea.
Let us then, moving right along, go to the third group, which was the monitoring and SWA, and this is our colleague Doreen.
I'm presenting on behalf of the monitoring blue team. Can you raise your hands for recognition? That is it. It was a team that has passion on the subject. We divided the outcome into 3 parts: short-term, mid-term, and long-term. And for short-term, we are saying, as SWA, let's start with coordination. Coordination of all those initiatives involved in monitoring, so that we have a harmonized product. We are also adding that we need to create the SWA monitoring working group of lead major monitoring initiatives, the WHO, UNICEF, AMCAO, and the rest. Why? Because we need to have one collective stand. Sometimes we cause fatigue to the person who give us data. We need to commission a rapid appraisal of sector analysis processes and good practices of WASH monitoring at country level, so that we are able to understand the status. We are able to identify gaps of the national levels. We are able to identify areas where they need capacity building, so that we are able to come up with the quality national monitoring data that will make quality global data. We also agreed that we need to encourage donors to support strengthening national monitoring. As is now, the donors don't seem to be prioritizing this. And yet, it is a priority, it is a key that the national level need supporting in various ways. What do we have to present for medium-term actions? We are saying we need to develop a shared set of standards and norms for monitoring? Can we define the indicators? Can we have a common stand of what we all mean so that we are able to get harmonized data? And, so that, and even in terms of timing and efficiency and all that. We are also saying that we need to encourage donors to use information to better target their assistance. Can the donors use the information obtained to prioritize and give and allocate resources accordingly? Still on the donors, we are saying track donor behavior. What do we mean? Including aid effectiveness and support for national processes. We are emphasizing national because these are building blocks of global information. As a team, we closed our eyes and looked very far to a very long term. And we are saying what we want to see in the long term. We want to work towards one fantastic global, regional, national system for which we have not yet found another unpronounceable abbreviation. But that's what we want to see in a very long time. We'd like to have those who are sharing the same.
Before we go into the plenary discussion, I wanted to perhaps just share a thought as we're listening to the results from Group 1, Group 2, Group 3. We're certainly at different points of our understanding of our ideas of where we want to go moving forward. And this reminds me very much of the discussion that took place in Bolivia right before the election of Evo Morales. And I was in Bolivia at the time, so I was watching this evolve. And one of the questions was, and our friend Roberto from Paraguay maybe can also testify to this, one of the questions that was put to the national debate was, what type of autonomy do we want in our departments / subnational governments / regions? And the idea was, well, let's look at someone else who's done it. And so they turned to Spain. Spain that has a long tradition of very strong autonomous governments. And they asked Spain, how did you do it? What's the formula? And the Spanish said, there is no formula. It's been a work in progress for hundreds of years. And so any entity that will have an impact needs to evolve. And this is, I think, part of an important process that we're all contributing to the evolution of this sanitation and water for all. With that, I'd like to lead into the plenary discussion. And please, let's take this time to really look at the different points that were put on the table, as well as provide opinions on other groups where we did not participate. And I would like to ask Piers to help us with this exercise.